If you are ready to go deep and harness the full power and potential of astrology, stay with me. My name is Alina, and I am the astrologer for creatives and changemakers. Today we're talking about Saturn. Saturn. Saturn is the most distant planet that you can see with the naked eye. In traditional astrology, it would be the furthest out planet. We weren't able to see past this planet until the 18th century. Saturn has quite an air of seriousness to him. He's one of the two malefics, one of the more difficult planets in astrology. Not very popular. Not very popular, Saturn. The plan today, I will not be going over this is what Saturn means in each sign. This is what Saturn in Taurus means. This is what Saturn in Pisces mean. I'm just going to be going through what a Saturn is, who Saturn is in his most intrinsic, essential nature, getting to the root, the core of his symbolic meaning. And I think this is a very good way to go about your astrological studies, to first understand each of the planets in their most essential core nature, to really get to know who they are on their most deep level, to get a real felt sense and connection with who this character is, and then to study each of the zodiac signs, get to know each of them in their most core symbolic fundamental components, and then get to know the houses and the aspects to be able to ultimately make delineations for yourself, to be able to interpret your own birth chart and those of people or places or businesses around you as you see fit. Because the symbols will not have their full transformational power until you can relate to them personally and understand how to apply them and recognize them in your own life. It's extremely empowering to be able to identify, oh, here is Saturn showing up in my life. This is where my moon energy is coming through. I can see this aspect to my Venus placement playing out, and similarly to the world around you. It will be much more effective and transformative for you to be able to apply and understand the symbols of astrology in your own life rather than having someone tell you what this means for you. That will never be as deeply transformative as for you to understand in the most root core deep way what this is for you in your life specifically, because all of the symbols in astrology have many different meanings. These are multivalent, multifaceted, very complex, layered, nuanced symbols. So not every single delineation, not every single meaning of each of these symbols will apply to you in every situation. So the more that you understand and become fluent in the language of astrology, the more that you can converse and be moved by and understand deeply how these energies, these archetypes, these symbols, these planets are playing out in your life and coming through you, manifesting through you. So Saturn, who is he? Saturn is associated with structure, discipline, boundaries, limitation, constraint, isolation, hardship. He's sort of the archetype of the stern, disciplining, punishing father. Also time, loss, suffering, mastery, fear, forced activities, things that you have to endure. Saturn is sort of your core wounding. Oftentimes, the placement of Saturn in your chart will indicate areas that you have experienced hardship and difficulties, especially as a child, and often things that get better with age. So Saturn is the furthest planet away that you can see with the naked eye. So he became sort of associated with boundaries for this reason, that he is the limit, the boundary, the furthest, most distant star in traditional astrology that you can see wandering around. And he has this very dim light for this reason. And also because he's the furthest away, he moves the slowest. So it takes the longest for Saturn to take his orbit around the sun, get through the zodiac, about 30 years, 29 and a half years. And of course, traditional astrologers, ancient astrologers didn't know this, but Saturn literally has rings, famously. So that is another core symbolic meaning that he has, that there is literally this boundary, this constraint, these rings encircling Saturn. In the Greek pantheon, Saturn would be Kronos, lord of time. And even before the Greek pantheon being applied to the planets, even before Saturn became Kronos, he was, for the Babylonians, Ninurta, who was this lord of agriculture, which is why his symbol is looking like the scythe. Interestingly, he was also god of irrigation, which sort of makes sense in this way that we understand Saturn to be structure. So creating in these ancient times stone pathways that would channel water in certain directions. This is a very powerful illustration of structure and creating flow through structure, which Saturn would be master of. He was also known as a god of healing in these ancient times. Specifically, he had this ability to cure people of their demons, which is very interesting when we think about Saturn as having his joy in the 12th house, which is the place of bad spirit, now in modern times associated with mental health and spirituality. So it's very fitting that he was known to be able to rid people of these evil spirits that maybe now we might in modern times think about as mental health issues. And if you're very interested to learn more about the ancient mythologies that are relating to the planets, you might want to check out Demetra George and her work. She is a PhD scholar of ancient astrology and has lots of great books and lectures on these topics. So I'm not so much an expert in mythology, but if you are very curious about this, you can take a deep dive with her. In modern astrology, they don't identify so much with this idea of planets being malefic, and I do resonate with the notion that there are light and shadow sides to all planets and all archetypes and all symbols. Even the more challenging planets like Saturn still have their light sides, the benefits, the importance, the necessity of their energy, and even the more beneficial planets, the benefics, Jupiter and Venus, still have their shadow sides. Too much of a good thing, you know? But in traditional astrology, there are two malefics, Saturn and Mars. These are the two more challenging planets in the zodiac that want to do difficult things for you and illustrate areas of challenge or hardship in your life. So Saturn's version of this is, like I was saying, this very kind of cold, removed, restraint, punishing, limitation, scarcity, fear, this very cold, removed, disciplining type of energy. The other malefic in the planetary schema is Mars. Mars is very challenging in quite a different way. So Mars is this very fiery warrior, violence, anger, aggression, splitting, severing, piercing, inflammation, this very heating, active, fast moving type of malefic. Whereas Saturn is sort of a slow and cold malefic. Mars is a very fast and hot type of malefic. And whether or not Mars or Saturn will be more challenging for you depends on if you have a day or a night chart in traditional astrology. So people who were born during the day where the sun is above the ascendant-descendant axis, for these people, Mars tends to be the more challenging of the two planets, the two malefics. And for people born at night, Saturn tends to be the more challenging of the two malefics. So this is because Saturn enjoys or is more functional or is sort of a part of the day team planets. So some planets prefer the daytime and some prefer the nighttime. So Saturn prefers the day. So when he is around at night or a part of the natal imprint in a night chart, then he is not in such a good mood, is not able to do, or is not so inclined to be acting and behaving well. So we call this being the malefic contrary to the sect. So Saturn's sect is whether you have a day or a night chart, whether it's daytime or nighttime. So being contrary to the sect means that it will be more difficult or less beneficial, less constructive. So Saturn is the malefic contrary to sect during the nighttime in a night chart. Mars is the malefic contrary to sect in a day chart. So as far as the light and shadow sides of Saturn, of course, having a Saturnian experience can be very painful, can feel like hardship, punishment, this very dark and isolating time. But Saturn also has this very important and necessary constructive function that is to provide structure and limitation and boundaries in your life. And although these are difficult things to experience when you are on the receiving end of someone or something setting a limitation or a boundary upon you, it's also extremely important to be able to have these qualities in your life, for you to be able to set boundaries and create structure and acknowledge your own limitation. That this is something associated more with maturity, to be able to recognize and have sort of humility when confronted with limitations. But it's not necessarily fun, but it is very important and powerful to be able to say no, to be able to understand what is not for you or not for right now, and to have also Saturn is associated with authority, this own inner authority, to be able to recognize when it's time to say no and when it's time to say yes. Both your yes and your no are very important. Saturn is also discipline, and this of course is another very empowering, important quality that everyone at some point we all work towards developing. Discipline is the key to mastery, which is another Saturnian quality. And to become a master, to become extremely skillful, to have authority, requires a lot of enduring difficulties. For instance, if we think about Saturn in martial arts, for instance, if you are someone who is into fighting, into some kind of combative sport or something, to become a master of any sort of strength building athletic activity like that requires that you continually come up against your limit and be humbled by what you are presently unable to do, and to be able to sit with the discomfort of that boundary long enough to be able to see it expand. And this is sort of Saturn. It takes time and it takes enduring discomfort. It takes structure to be able to carve out this time to be with your edges in order to attain mastery. This is all very Saturnian. And again, the experience of this is not fun, but the result is extremely important and empowering. This is the constructive, beneficial side to Saturn. You could also think about this in terms of finances, for instance, to be frugal, to have a spending plan, to be exercising constraint with regard to the money you spend. This can be very strategic and helpful for your finances to have this kind of frugality. This would be another Saturnian sort of attitude in a different area of life. A very Saturnian person in their personality might be kind of cold or aloof or distant, not so emotional. And the shadow side of this could be someone who tends towards being maybe a little bit punishing, a little bit distant or cold, or very comfortable with denying or saying or doing difficult things in a situation. On the more positive side of a very Saturnian person could be someone who has a lot of discipline and seriousness and ability to execute their goals, and the commitment, follow through, perseverance to construct what it is that they believe is worthwhile to bring into the future, to create something long lasting and meaningful, is also very Saturnian. Another great way to learn about Saturn and the planets in general is to understand them through the archetypes that they are embodying in the zodiac. So Saturn rules Capricorn and Aquarius. So we can look at these two signs as an illustration of who Saturn is on the ground. The planetary energy is sort of the more abstract, pure, ethereal quality, and the zodiac sign is a little bit more embodied, a little bit more human and alive and nuanced and complex. So the zodiac sign that a planet rules is like an embodiment of that planet, and each of the planets have one or two signs that are their domiciles, their places of rulership. So I'll pull up a zodiac wheel here. So here we can see all of the different zodiac signs in this outer circle. We have the names, and the circle within there we have the symbol for the constellation and also the glyph. Within that, we have the planetary symbols. These are the planets that rule each of the signs with the label in English on the circle within there. Then we have the quadruplicity and the elements, whether these signs are cardinal, fixed, or mutable, or air, earth, fire, water signs, and then whether or not they are masculine or feminine on the circle within there. So we can see here Saturn, here's Saturn, the symbol for Saturn is the ruler of Capricorn and also the ruler of Aquarius. So the way that ancient astrologers thought about this notion of planetary rulership was that the sky is like its own world. And in this sky world, there are kingdoms or regions that are the zodiac signs. So this sky world is broken up into 12 kingdoms that are the 12 zodiac signs. And these are like countries that have their own kings or queens and their own culture. And each of the planets is like the wandering character that traverse around the sky world, and sometimes they find themselves in places that are very supportive to their nature, in their home signs, maybe their domicile, which would be a culture that is very much in alignment with their own nature, their own energy. Or they could find themselves somewhere that's very difficult for them, somewhere that has a culture that is quite antithetical, the opposite of what this planet wants to do. And then the aspects would be the relationships between the characters, whether or not these characters are getting along or if they're fighting. And this is sort of the narrative that plays out that becomes the mythology, the story of who you are, in a sense. So Saturn as a symbol, as the ruler of Capricorn and Aquarius. Capricorn is the cardinal earth, feminine version of Saturn, and Aquarius is the fixed air, masculine version of Saturn. So interestingly, Aquarius is the water bearer, even though he is an air sign, and Capricorn is the sea goat, even though she is a earth sign. I find that very interesting that there's this quality of water within each of Saturn's two places of rulership, the water bearer and the sea goat. Although the sea goat is an earth sign, she is able to dwell in the sea or in land. And Aquarius, even though he is an air sign, his function is to bring water to the gods, the water bearer. So they both have these watery qualities to them, which is interesting, again, going back to this Babylonian understanding of Saturn, god of irrigation, and also healing, which is a very watery quality, that although Saturn is not himself water, he has a very strong relationship with water. And maybe this is related to how water needs a container. Water always is taking the shape of whatever it's in. Water requires this Saturnian element. And I think the way that this plays out for both of Saturn's signs, Aquarius and Capricorn, is that because Saturn is Lord of Time, the furthest, most distant planet, sort of at the edge of what is the bounds, the constraint that time has trapped us in. This is kind of the mythology of Kronos. He has this long-term vision, is really concerned with both tradition, the past, the deep past, and the future generations, where humanity is moving in general. So when you're thinking on these timelines, it is important to be rooted and connected to something meaningful. The why. Why would we build anything? What is worth building? What is worth bringing into the future? And how can we honor the past and learn from our ancestors and bring into the future the structure that will be healing or beneficial or constructive, honoring these age-old morals. This is sort of a general Saturnian vibe, train of thought. So when we think about Capricorn, cardinal earth, I think of Capricorn as like raising mountains. Capricorn is cardinal. This is the beginning of a season, the beginning of winter. And cardinal signs tend to be very good at initiating, starting things, getting things going. And earth signs tend to be very practical. Capricorn is sort of the archetypal businessman, very skilled at thinking about the future and constructing systems and structures that will support the long term. Capricorn is, if you think about the seasons, the beginning of winter, the time of year when you might be thinking about how we have harvested all of our crops, the fall is over, and now we need to plan for the winter. Now we need to prepare for how much food we can eat and divvy it out so that we're not overdoing it. Understanding the real threat of scarcity and how to divvy out and delineate resources so that we can make it through the long haul. This is very Saturnian, very Capricorn thinking. It's going to be difficult to make it through these hard times, but we can do it if we think about the future and plan ahead. This is Capricorn. Very skilled at coming up with a plan, executing, understanding that it will be hard and difficult, but we can get through it. And again, being the sea goat, I find that oftentimes Capricorn people are connected to some kind of deeper, almost spiritual quality that is not something that they always identify with, especially in their youth, but certainly more so after the Saturn return and maybe a little bit later in life. This would be around the age of 30 or something. Capricorns tend to connect more with this deeper why. And sometimes it can be very difficult for them to admit that this is a part of them because there is this very earthy quality that is the practical, what makes sense, the nuts and bolts of getting things done, getting to work, doing the hard work. But there is no really reason to do that if you don't have that deeper why. Because Capricorn, in the Saturn sense, is not just thinking about the future, their children, but Capricorn can really be tapped into future generations, centuries, millennia. Where is humanity going and how can we really make something meaningful to last? So you sort of have to be tapped into these deeper places, this watery element that you are serving as the force of structure to find the motivation to be thinking and planning and enacting things on that type of time scale. But Capricorns also tend to be work hard, play hard type of people. As hard as they work, they also know how to party. He is the goat. After all, the sea goat. Then we have Aquarius, the other embodiment of Saturn. So Aquarius, our fixed air masculine version of Saturn. So Aquarius then is, as an air sign, more oriented towards mental structures, very brainy. And the way that Saturn sort of plays out through Aquarius, in being the water bearer, Aquarius is very concerned with humanity and thinks a lot about what is best for the collective. Air signs are both mental and social. So oftentimes Aquarius people will spend a lot of time thinking about what would be the best social structures that would benefit the most people. This is the sort of humanitarian nature of Aquarius. For instance, Karl Marx was an Aquarius, and I think communism is a great example of an Aquarian type of ideal where communism has this very structured system for organizing humans, and its understanding is that we may need to have less in order for the collective to be benefiting optimally from the resources that exist. So Aquarius is comfortable with the idea that yes, you might need to have less, I might need to have less, we might need to ration things or kind of moderate ourselves in order to move forward in a way that's beneficial for the collective. Not that all Aquarius people are communists, that's just an example of sort of a very Aquarian ideal, I think. Not necessarily that this is going to be the mental structure that all Aquarius people come up with or something. Just an example. Another way that Saturn sort of plays out through Aquarius is that Aquarius tends to be known as sort of the black sheep, quite eccentric, very unique. Aquarius tends to always do things their own way. Aquarius is very comfortable being the odd one out, being the black sheep, being the only one of their kind. And this is sort of the Saturnian feeling of isolation that can be sort of a lonely feeling. But as an embodiment of Saturn, where you are Saturn rather than sort of experiencing Saturn from outside of you, Aquarius can be quite comfortable with this. Maybe it is sort of isolating and lonely sometimes, but it also is a place of comfort. Aquarius wouldn't have it any other way. They enjoy being, to some extent, the odd one out. It's important to them to be unique. And Aquarius is also a fixed sign versus Capricorn being very cardinal. So sometimes Aquarius has this potentially rigid or stubborn kind of attitude about their ideals, especially as they're younger. This is another quality of Saturn. Saturn always gets better with time. Saturn is especially difficult for the youth and younger people, as Saturn is sort of old age and wisdom and time. So if you are young and not learned, it will be experientially difficult to come into contact with the Saturnian energy because you just aren't there yet. Another really illuminating way to understand the energy of a planet is to look at their opposites. So in this zodiac wheel, everything is meaningful. This symbol is just packed with potent symbolic meaning. It would take a very long time to understand deeply and completely all of the symbolism that is laden in here. This is a also free download available on my website if you would like to have this for your personal studies to be able to look at and refer back to and blow up and see in a large scale way. Feel free to head to my website and download it for free. It will be invaluable to your astrological learning. So we can see Saturn is opposite to the Sun here in the Aquarius-Leo axis. This is the masculine axis of Saturn. And then Capricorn, Saturn is opposite to the Moon. So this is the feminine axis of Saturn. Masculine Aquarius, masculine Leo, Saturn opposite the Sun, feminine Capricorn, feminine Cancer, opposite the Moon. And signs that are opposite will always share the same gender and quadruplicity. So Capricorn, cardinal earth, feminine, Cancer, cardinal water, feminine, both cardinal, Aquarius, fixed air, masculine, Leo, fixed fire, masculine, both fixed and masculine. So usually in the zodiac wheel, the oppositions that are present are between the same planets. For instance, Jupiter is always opposite Mercury, both in Sagittarius, Gemini, and in Pisces, Virgo. Venus is always opposite Mars, both in Libra, Aries, and Scorpio, Taurus. But Saturn is opposite the two luminaries, the Sun and the Moon. So this is a little bit different, but also similar, because the two luminaries are similar in a way. They're both sort of the king and the queen. They are the conscious and the subconscious. They are the mind and the body, the self, but just sort of two different sides, the masculine, feminine side of the self, in a sense. So the essential function of Saturn is sort of to say no, to deny and decrease. The essential function of the luminaries is to say yes, to radiate, emanate. They are visible and warm and affirming. Saturn is cold, distant, and denying. And we can think about this Saturn-Sun aspect, where the Sun is very much relating to the self, and Leo is sort of the archetype of saying yes to the self. Leo is very much radiating self energy, comfortable being the center of attention, the star, the leader, very heart-centered, self-expressive sign. And we can think of Aquarius in that sense, opposite to that nature, as sort of saying no to the self, self-denying. Aquarius is much more concerned with the collective, what is best for everyone. It doesn't really matter who I am. I don't even necessarily know. It doesn't matter. What matters is that we are a part of a whole, and what is going to be the best for everyone. And if that requires some self-denial and some suffering, then that's what it requires. This is sort of the Saturn, Leo, the Aquarius-Leo opposition. And on the other axis, we have Cancer, who is in her function of saying yes, more so saying yes to others. Cancer is very nurturing, very motherly, wants to caretake. It can be very difficult for Cancer to say no to other people. Whereas Capricorn, as a function of saying no, is quite comfortable saying no to others. Capricorn will set a boundary, has no problem rejecting a person or thing as it is necessary. Not that it's necessarily malicious to them, it's just not really a big deal. They can do that if they need to do that. For Cancer, that can be very difficult. It can be very difficult to say no, especially to other people. Cancer wants to have this supportive, nurturing impact, this healing presence on the people around them. So it can be very difficult to set boundaries with others for Cancer. And of course, there's light and shadow sides to both of these things. So Cancer will be extremely good at being a emotionally supportive, nurturing, nourishing person in their environment, and struggle to set boundaries and say no to people. Capricorn will be very good at setting boundaries and saying no to things that are not working and being clear and constructive and moving forward, but might be a little bit harder to be emotionally nurturing and supportive and in that more feeling space of caretaking for others. That's not going to be a strength for Capricorn generally. And of course, on the Aquarius-Leo axis, it is a gift and a superpower and beautiful to be self-expressive and to shine the light that you have into the world. And sometimes it can be taken a little bit too far, it can be a little bit maybe self-absorbed or lose sight of what actually matters in the bigger scheme of things. That's the shadow side of Leo. And then for Aquarius, of course, it is wonderful to be concerned with the collective and liberation and creating mental structures that are going to benefit humanity. And also, it is important to know who you are and be connected to that, to be able to actually have the impact that you uniquely can have. That it's not just airy, fairy, mental, let me analytically work out what the best situation would be. No, there is a self energy that you need to bring, and who you are underneath of that is very significant in the development that you have as you're bringing whatever this ideology is that you think is most constructive for the world out. Nothing is just good. Nothing is just bad. To continue our exploration of Saturn in the zodiac, Saturn is exalted in Libra. So this essentially means that Saturn has a really good time in Libra. Libra, this might be surprising as Libra is ruled by Venus over here, also cardinal air sign, masculine. However, Venus and Saturn actually really work well together. Any Venusian ideal, Venus is concerned with art, beauty, aesthetics, love, romance, harmony, peace, all of these things. Any sort of pinnacle manifestation of art and beauty will require Saturnian discipline and commitment, perseverance. Ballet is a great example of Saturn and Venus coming together, where it is this beautiful practice, extremely Venusian, and also requires years of intense training and discipline and is very difficult. And any fine art or craft has this quality of taking time, discipline, structure to really hone and achieve mastery. You can also see this play out in a birth chart if there's a Saturn-Venus aspect. Saturn-Venus trine is really nice. Saturn-Venus conjunction. It can be difficult also in regard to relationships. Maybe having some Saturn energy in a relationship could be more difficult, but as far as the arts and crafts, it is like the fine wine aspect, something that takes time to develop, but with the more time that it is given, the more time that is applied, the more delicious and refined the art experience wine becomes. Saturn also has his fall or detriment in Aries. So Aries is the other malefic sign ruled by Mars here, like I mentioned at the beginning. So Mars, again, being related to aggression, war, violence, moving fast, lots of energy, severing, splitting, can also be passion, even sexual energy. So these are difficult qualities, but difficult qualities that are sort of opposite to the difficult qualities that Saturn is bringing to a situation. So Saturn does not move fast and break things. Saturn moves slow and denies you things. Saturn is the structure. Mars is the force that blasts the structure to pieces. Aries is also sort of the baby in the zodiac, the very first sign. It has this fresh out of the womb energy, the spring equinox, the new cycle. Aries, the warrior, is like breaking free from the mother in a sense, this new life. And Saturn, on the other hand, is old age, the old man, the wise old man. That's not going to be easy for him to be in this more immature, in the zodiac sense, baby energy. That's not what Saturn wants to do. So it can be difficult for Saturn, the planet of patience, to be in Aries, probably the zodiac sign most famous for impatience. Saturn has his detriment in Leo and Cancer, which, like I talked about, Leo and Cancer are opposite to Aquarius and Capricorn. These are the places that have opposite nature to what Saturn wants to do, so that's a very difficult place for him as well. And what it means for Saturn to be in a difficult place can be that in a birth chart, for instance, for a person, that maybe this could be a part of you that feels a little bit difficult, the part of you that is concerned with setting boundaries and saying no and taking time and discipline, perseverance, that these inner qualities could be a little bit difficult for you to connect with, because sort of the flavor that Saturn is taking on, if he is in Aries, Leo, Cancer, is a little bit opposite to that nature. So he's in a place where the culture around him is not supporting his function that he's meant to play out for you in your life and personality as well. So maybe it can be just a little bit quirky, oftentimes, with regard to those types of areas, qualities of life. It can also make him a little bit more destructive, maybe if he is aspecting something difficult in your chart, that Saturn is already indicative of hardship. So if he is in a night chart, not at the time of day that he wants to be in his fall in Aries, not a sign that he wants to be in, that he might act out a little bit worse. So if that area of life that he is pointing to, for instance, maybe Saturn in Aries in the fourth house in a night chart, this is the place that has to do with parents and home, the fourth house. So if he's in his fall in a time of day that he doesn't like, then maybe that can indicate potentially even more sort of difficulty and hardship with regards to the relationship to the parents or home life, especially, again, as one is young. But none of these things are like hopeless or anything. These are all things that we can develop. It's just astrology is a tool to become aware of the parts of our life that are more difficult or more constructive, and through this awareness we can build relationships and understanding around places that might be more difficult and allow ourselves to relate to these aspects of self rather than being consumed or overrun or possessed by these energies. And we can learn to work with them. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but Saturn has his joy in the 12th house. The 12th house is the place of bad spirit, which is associated with imprisonment, enemies, isolation, mental health, spirituality, transformation. It is a dark house that's not aspecting the ascendant. So Saturn is very happy here in this place that has to do with many of the qualities that he's already ruling over. So if you had Saturn in the 12th house, this would be a condition of bonification, they call it. There's many different things that you can look at to determine the quality of a planet in your chart. So whether or not the planet is in a sign that they really enjoy and works well with, that's one indication of like a more positive condition of bonification. Or you can look at also the places of joy. Is the planet in a house that it really likes? For instance, Saturn has his joy in the 12th, the moon has her joy in the 3rd, so that is a condition of bonification. There's many different ways that we can analyze how well situated a planet is in the chart, and this is just one to look at. So, as far as your interpretation of Saturn in your birth chart, because Saturn takes about 2.5 years to move through each sign, your Saturn sign is not so unique to who you are. Everyone born within a 2.5 period will have the same Saturn sign. So, looking at the sign placement is definitely interesting and important, but most often people tend to look more at the house placement, which is very unique to you. The houses will change every 2 hours depending on the rising sign that you have when you're born, so that's much more unique, and that tends to indicate the place of potential core wounding, especially in your childhood, areas that you might experience difficulty in throughout your life, or that might just be a little bit more challenging for you. Or if Saturn is very well placed in a chart, that maybe it's a place that you will eventually develop mastery in, or have this sense of structure and discipline around. Saturn can also indicate your relationship to authority and your own inner authority. And you could also look at Saturn and his relationship to Venus to look at potential difficulties around relationships. So if you had Saturn and Venus in the same place in your chart, then this might be someone who either has experienced hardship in relationships, or maybe is attracted to Saturnian qualities in other people, or maybe is attracted to older aged people. Saturn is also age. Saturn is often not interpreted so much in a personality way, but more often in ways that you encounter Saturnian energy outside of you, like I'm describing, the way that life treats you, the types of experiences you have. Although it is also internal, again, because it's the most distant, slow-moving planet, it tends to often be a little bit more outside of you. Saturn return is something important we should talk about that a lot of people have heard about, even if you're not that deep into astrology. So the Saturn return is when Saturn comes to be in the same place in your birth chart that he was when you were born. This is sort of a coming of age astrologically, because as I was saying, in traditional astrology, Saturn is the furthest away planet. Therefore, it takes him the longest time to make his way around the zodiac. So by the time you have your Saturn return, you will have experienced a full transit, a full zodiac cycle of every single planet in the chart, and not until that point. So this is sort of when you are reaching maturity. But of course, Saturn is our more difficult planet. So this often feels like sort of a dark night of the soul. Can be an extremely challenging time period where we are confronted with who we are, especially if maybe Saturnian qualities had not really been integrated into your life very much. It will be potentially even more painful, and you will be confronted with Saturn. And this will often show up in the house placement that he's located in. For instance, if you had Saturn in the second house, this might be someone who struggles with finances or has sort of a scarcity or frugality type of mindset around money. So when the Saturn return comes around, often themes related to personal finance will be resurfacing in the way that Saturn is relating to that part of life for you. Or if it was parents, then maybe issues with the parents might resurface. If it was the fourth house, if it was the 10th house, maybe issues with career. So depending on the house placement, that's the area of life that you could look in to see where this dark night of the soul might be sort of pointed towards. But by the time we are finished with our Saturn return, this is generally a period where you have confronted the parts of your life that you need to take responsibility for and understand what you are responsible for and also what you're not responsible for, and grow into that maturity where you are hopefully at this point able to take responsibility for your own life and who you are, and start having the structure that you need to enact your purpose and have the strength, the structure, the boundaries, the discipline to support who you are and the impact you're meant to have in the world. And the last point that I'll touch on about Saturn is Saturn retrogrades. This happens about once a year for about 4 to 5 months. Saturn turns around and goes backwards in the sky. So at the point where Saturn is turning around, this is a Saturn station. Either he's stationing going retrograde or stationing going direct. This is the turning around point. So because Saturn is so far away, that's why these retrograde periods are so long, 4 to 5 months, and also take up such a large fraction of the time. So Saturn is retrograde for about a third of the time. So there's a decent chance that you have Saturn retrograde in your birth chart. So So sometimes Saturn retrograde people can have these Saturnian qualities more oriented inwards, where maybe that structure, discipline, kind of cold, aloof, distant energy is something that is more who you are, whereas maybe if Saturn's direct, it can be something that is more something you experience from outside of you, that those are qualities that you encounter rather than that you embody. Sometimes if you're born under a Saturn retrograde, that these Saturn retrograde periods can be a little bit more constructive for you, that maybe this is the time when the structure and boundary and discipline actually starts to come through more for you, because this is the Saturnian imprint in your birth chart. The way that Saturn is inside of you is retrograde. So when he is retrograde in real life, in the sky, in real time during transits, then this might be a time where the Saturnian energy flows a little bit more smoothly through you. And when Saturn stations, this is sort of like an exclamation point on the Saturnian energy, really coming home, bringing in hard this Saturn energy. Usually you will feel something Saturnian happen. But of course, with all of these things, it depends on how the transit relates to your birth chart. So especially if a Saturn station is happening near one of your natal planets or an important angle or something like that, then you will probably feel it very much so in relation to the energy of that planet or placement that he is stationing on. Or if you were born under a Saturn station, this is very significant. It tends to just really, again, give you this mega boost of Saturnian energy. To know whether or not you were born on a Saturn station, you would have to look at an ephemeris, which is telling you each day when a planet is where in the sky and also when they're turning around. So you would have to look at around the months before and after your birth time on an ephemeris and see when Saturn was stationing retrograde. Or I guess you could just Google your birth year and Saturn station dates to know if you were born near a Saturn station. So you would feel this very strongly for sure if it was a station happening within a week before or after that exact station. So that'll, again, just give you this super Saturn burst of authority, structure, discipline, that you will be really embodying this energy much more so. And also probably that Saturn stations will affect you much more strongly as you experience them throughout the rest of your life, which could be constructive or destructive. And this will probably depend on the type of transit, where it's hitting in your chart, and also how well Saturn is placed in your birth chart, if he is generally happy or not with his position there. So that is pretty much a broad overview of Saturn, who he is, what he does, how you work with him in your birth chart, interpret him, different transit things to experience. Definitely feel free to leave me a comment if you have any questions. I will respond to all of your questions. And if you want to either be notified when I continue to release these videos where I'm going through each of the planets and taking a deep dive into their essential nature and meaning, please subscribe. Or if you just want to support me, you can like and subscribe as well. I really appreciate that. And of course, you can download my Zodiac graphic for free on my website if you would like to use that as a learning tool. Super useful, highly recommend. And I offer natal readings, birth chart consultations. If you are resonating with the way that I talk about and think about astrology and would like to have my help, my guidance, facilitating your relationship with these symbols and how they're showing up for you in your life, I would love to do that with you. My website is linked below. You can book either a 60-minute or a 90-minute consultation. In the 60-minute consultation, we'll talk about who you are, the birth chart as a symbol of your personality, strengths and weaknesses, areas of challenges, hardship, and also gifts and strengths. And in the 90-minute consultation, we'll also get into all of that plus timing, where I'll talk about the year ahead, the transits you have coming up that you will probably feel more so, when you might experience peaks in your career, when you may have or will encounter what will become the focus of your life's work. Talk about sort of purpose and cycles and using the past to predict what may come up for you in the future, and the general direction and orientation of your life for the next year and in general. Thank you so much for being here. Be well.